kind of two groups of people, I think, in the world. There are people who can just kind of find their way anywhere. They can, you drop into a big city, and they can just find their way. They don't need a map, and they just have an uncanny ability to get where they want to go. And then there are other people who are just the opposite of that. They're the people who get lost in a parking lot, right? Like every time they come out of the mall, they don't know where their car is. They can't remember where their car is, right? And they get lost. Let's be honest. There's some people you get lost in your house every so often. You're like, you're trying to find your way to get there. And these people, these people because they don't like to go to like corn mazes and stuff, right? They don't think that's funny because they're like, whoa, that's my life. Like corn mazes and being lost, that's my whole life. So that isn't something that I consider to be fun. And they just get lost. They're confused a lot of times, and they get confused and they get lost a lot of times. I got to be honest, and I told her I was going to do this, so I got to pick on my wife. My wife is one of those people. Every time we go to the mall or we go to Walmart or whatever, she starts going left, and I'm like, honey, our car's right. She's like, yeah, but I thought, no, we weren't. We're over here. And it doesn't matter. She just always seems to get lost. She is what we would call directionally challenged. Directionally challenged. So there's people like that. As a matter of fact, I got to tell you, we'll drive someplace, and I usually do the bulk of the driving, but every so often I'll get tired and I'll say, honey, you got to drive for an hour or something. And every time she goes, yeah, but what if I get lost? What if I get lost while you're asleep? And I always tell her, honey, I have mapped us out the next hour or 2 hours. Just stay on this road and we're good. You can't get lost while I'm asleep. I've mapped it out for you already so I can sleep easy for just a little while. Okay, and it works out. It works out. So let me talk to you just for a second about the art of lostness. The art of lostness. And I want to tell you 4 things about the art of lostness. If you don't have notes and you want some notes, one of our ushers will get you some. And you can follow along with us. But 4 things about the art of lostness. And I apologize. This thing is not fitting on my ear for some reason today. Okay, so number 1, we don't get lost on purpose. We don't get lost, unless you're going to a corn maze or something like that, we don't get lost on purpose. We don't like being lost. And it's actually difficult. It's very difficult to get lost on purpose. The second fact about the art of lostness, is this. We're lost before we know it, right? You intended to be in Akron, Ohio, but you're seeing the signs for Dayton, Ohio, right? You didn't even realize that you were lost until all of a sudden you're someplace, there's a landmark, there's something that tells you that, oh my goodness, I'm lost. We're lost before we know that we're lost. Thirdly, this morning, the third thing about lostness is this. Let me find it here. And this is true. Men go faster when they're lost, right? I don't know what the scientific proof is for this, but it's just a fact. When we get lost, all of a sudden we speed up. We think the faster we go, the quicker we're going to get from being lost. And there's no real explanation for this, but it's a fact. It's a fact of the art of lostness. And then number 4, listen, this is the important one. We wind up where the road we're on ends up. We wind up where the road we're on ends up. And this is regardless of your color, your gender, your IQ. It's regardless of your net worth. And where you are, the path that you're on, is where you are going to ultimately end up. And what's true about driving isn't obvious when it comes to living sometimes. What's true about driving isn't always obvious when it comes to living. The difference between driving and living is this, that physical paths have predictable outcomes. But actually that's true for both if we're honest about it, right? So let me illustrate it like this. If you've ever gone hiking, you go and you look, and there's usually a map at the beginning, and it'll show you where all the paths go. So if you want to take the white diamonds, it shows you where the white diamond path, and there's a red square or a red circle or green, whatever, and they'll show you where they go. And you look at that map, and it predicts where the path is going to take you. But as you're going on that path, right, you're on white diamonds, and it's easy for us to all of a sudden find ourselves on red squares or green circles, you know? But the path that we were supposed to be on, if we stick to those white diamonds, we can predict the outcome of where we want to be. And there's other paths in our lives that we can predict as well. In our lives, we can predict certain outcomes. We can predict the destination by the path that we're on. Let me illustrate it for you a couple of different ways this morning. If you continue to use your credit card, you're going to be in debt. If you refuse to eat the right foods and you refuse to exercise, eventually you're going to find yourself in some health problems, right? And physically, now these days, physically, thanks to technology, it's like almost impossible to get lost. If you think I'm wrong, pull out your phone and open up your Amazon account. It knows you're in church right now. You're going to see all kinds of religious things come up, right? Because retail outlets know where we're at because of GPS. All of a sudden, you know, you've been there and you've said something, and you're in the same room with Alexa, and then later on, all these things pop up. You know, you say, oh, boy, I'd love to go on a trip to Colorado. And next thing you know, on your phone, all these things about Colorado. No? Yeah, we all know. We all know Alexa's listening. We all do. We all do. Last week, we introduced to you the principle of the path. The principle of the path. And here's what the principle of the path says. It says that direction determines destination. Direction determines destination. This isn't just true geographically. It also applies to all the alleys of our life. The alleys of our life. You know the alleys of life, right? Financially, morally, professionally, spiritually, relationally, marriagely. I made that one up, okay? It's not a real word, but you know what I'm talking about. Now, if I were to ask you this morning, if I was to ask you where you want to be financially and relationally in 5 years and 2 years and 10 years, you'd probably have some idea. I want to be out of debt. I want to have this amount of money saved. We want to be engaged. We want to be married. We want to have children. I want to be a manager. I want to own my own business. You would have some kind of idea. And if you didn't have a plan, you would at least have a dream. I at least have a dream. And you know how I know this is true? Because working for 15 years with teenagers in youth ministry, every single teenager I ever met, they always said this: I'm going to be rich and I'm going to be famous. They just knew that they were going to grow up to be a huge success one day. Even if we don't have a plan, we have a dream. Let me tell you this morning that our attention isn't the same as our direction. Our intention isn't the same as our direction. There's often a disconnect between intention and direction. And now I don't want, and you don't want, and our Heavenly Father doesn't want you to be a victim of the disconnect. I don't want, you don't want, and our Heavenly Father doesn't want you to be a victim of the disconnect. And that's what we're going to talk about today. So here's the big idea, and we're going to expand this morning. It's this: that direction trumps intention every time. Your direction trumps your intention every time. A young lady says, I want to meet a great Christian guy, but I'll go out with any good-looking guy, right, who asks me out. A dad says, I want our family to be a unit and love being together, but I'm going to work all the time and I'm going to take extra trips. Maybe a grandparent says this. It says, I want to live long and I want to invest in my children. But for now, it doesn't matter what I eat or what I drink. And exercise, right? Who needs to exercise? Come on. I'll just have another piece of cake. One day, I'll be debt-free. I'll get there. But for now, debt's a part of life. I want my kids to be raised in church, and I want them to have the same Christian values that I grew up with. But when things are less busy, we'll actually go to church, right? When I'm married, of course, I'll honor my wife. But these girls, they're not my wife. It's different, right? Of course, I want to have a great relationship with my husband. So when the kids are grown, he'll be my priority. How about this one? When I meet the right person, I'll change. Once I'm making more money, I'll be generous. Yes, I want God to be with me in the tough times of my life. So when times get tough, then I'll get serious about my faith. And you may be sitting here going, wow, Pastor Paul, how did you know what I think? It's like you're reading my diary. It's like you're reading my thoughts. Can I tell you a secret? Even though you're unique, your story is not unique. And your path is not unique. And here's the big one. Your destination isn't either. So all the way back, 900 BC, King Solomon, the third king of Israel, son of King David, Solomon wrote a book we call the Proverbs, the book of Proverbs. You've heard of the book of Proverbs. And Solomon illustrates this whole idea for a group of young men. And he tells the story, he tells a parable. And you can kind of see, as it sets up, you can kind of see old Solomon. Solomon's old now, and he's got a group of young men sitting around him and begins to tell this parable. And he begins to share some wisdom. And here's the thing about Solomon. Solomon was the wisest man who ever lived, at least on paper. Solomon had so many pieces of wisdom and advice and good advice for all of us. And it's lasted all these generations. But sadly, Solomon himself didn't even follow his own advice. And when he was old, he missed the mark in his relationship with God. But here he is. He's an older man now, and he's sitting down, and he's talking to these young men. And he begins to tell this story or this parable involving a naive young man and a seductive married woman. Now, let me just say this up front. Women, I'm not saying that all women are seducers, okay? So I just want to clarify that. That's not the point of the story. And I also don't want anyone to think that I'm saying that all men are naive either, okay? That would be stating the obvious. So we're not going to go there, okay? So Solomon reminds us that what is intended as a diversion, listen, what is intended as a diversion is actually a direction with an unintended destination. What this young man thought was a diversion becomes a direction with an unintended destination. So let's take a look at Proverbs chapter 7, verses 6 through 27. Here we go. Verse 6 says this, "At the window of my house I looked down through the lattice." And verse 7 says, "I saw among the simple." Don't you like that? The simple, right? Easy pickings, right? "I saw among the simple, I noticed among the young men a youth who lacked judgment." Now here's what we know about judgment. Judgment requires experience and time. As you get older, you understand this, right? As you get older, you understand and you realize just how smart your parents were. It's funny, when you're a teenager, you have all the answers, and then you realize later on that you got really stupid because your parents were right all along. It's just the most amazing thing, isn't it? That's because judgment requires experience and time. So he goes on, verse 8, he says this. He says, he was going down the street near her corner. Now, who is she? Her corner, walking along in the direction of her house. The narrator is beginning to weave the story together for us. At twilight, as the day was fading, as the dark of night set in. Now, these are two different perspectives that we're going to look at today. We're going to look at the perspective of the narrator and the perspective of the naive young man. And these are two very, very different perspectives, and it's going to build this whole story, right? But they also come from kind of a different soundtrack. So if this story were playing, there would be two different songs playing in the background. For me, I think the young man, the naive young man's story that's playing, or the song that's playing, the soundtrack that's playing in the background is "Don't Stop Believing." And for the narrator, I think the song that's playing in the background is "Highway to Hell." Okay? And that's going to make a lot more sense as the story goes along. So here we go. Verse 10 says this. It says, then out came a woman. So here's her. This is she. This is the woman he's talking about. Out came a woman to meet him, dressed like a prostitute with crafty intent. While he's naive, while he's simple, she knows what she's up to. She's been there before. Verse 11, she is unruly and defiant. Her feet never stay home. Now in the street, now in the squares, at every corner, she lurks. She's that woman that's just always, every time he turns around, there she is. Verse 13, she took hold of him and kissed him, and with a brazen face, she said, today I fulfilled my vows, and I have food from my fellowship offering at home. Oh, every guy in here just went, food from fellowship offering. Oh, right? No, we don't know what that means in 2019. Like, what? What in the world? Like, back then, you're like wondering, okay, Solomon, well, what's the big deal? It's like food from your what's a fellowship offering in the first place, right? And obviously, they understood what that meant, but we're kind of lost by it today. We wonder, how in the world could he not resist the food from the fellowship offering? What's that? Well, the fellowship offering was a religious ceremony of the Jewish or the Canaanite origin. And we're not exactly sure exactly where it was started, but we know that it was what it was meant, or what that she was suggesting was that she had made peace with God. Now, if you grew up in church, either Protestant or Catholic, you can understand it one of two different ways. For us Protestants, our pastors used to say all the time, and we don't make as big a deal about it, maybe we should, but they would always say that we are not to receive this cup unworthily, right? Anybody know what I'm talking about? Like, you had to make sure all the sin was right in your life, and so you'd be there, and they're passing out the communion, and you're going, oh God, okay, I remember I did this, I did that, I was there, I was like, God, clean everything. I can't take this communion, or else I'm going to drink damnation to myself. That's what Paul writes. So we'd all get our lives right just before we took communion. Now, if you're Catholic, if you grew up Catholic, you would understand this by, you'd have to remember all the things that you had to tell the priest, right, before you went to confessional. Anybody with me, right? And I asked it in the first service. I ask it here again. Did any of you ever make up stuff when you went to the priest if you grew up Catholic? No? I've heard that a bunch of times. I always wondered I just want to go to confession one time. I just want to see what it's like. I'd like to go in and do this and go, I just want to confess. I'm a Protestant. I don't need this. I always wanted to do that when I was a kid. And so you would have to think of all the stuff that you had done in offense to God and get it cleaned up. So what she's saying, what this woman is saying, I've cleaned everything up. In other words, she's saying, I'm a good person. I'm someone you can trust. I'm a good person. Verse 15. And she says, so I've taken care, I fulfilled my vows, and here's what happens next. So I came out to meet you. I looked for you, and I have found you. And here's what this young man's thinking. This young man's thinking, you were looking for me? Me? That makes me special. That makes me special to you. You were looking for me. And the narrator is suggesting, no, you're not special, you're an idiot. And the boy, this young man, is thinking, I'm one in a million. Of all the young men she could be looking for, she was looking for me. And the narrator says, you're not one in a million, you're one of a million, my friend. She knows what she's doing. She goes on, and she says, I have covered my bed with colored linens from Egypt. I have perfumed my bed with myrrh, aloes, and cinnamon. Now, I listen to that, I'm like, that smells like that stinks. I mean, just like, you know. If you want to do it with cinnamon buns, yeah, now we're talking, you know. But, man, this sounds like a whole lot of perfume going on. And we kind of think of it that way in 2019, but this isn't 2019. This is 900 BC. And here's the difference between 2019 and 900 BC. 2019, we get a shower, maybe one or even two every day. 900 BC, they weren't taking a whole lot of showers. In other words, they stunk, right? And she's saying, my bed smells good. My bed is pleasant. My bed is a place where you would like to go. It's almost like a free bath on top of everything else. To smell pleasant was a big deal. It also indicated that she was a woman of wealth. Not just anybody could just put perfume all over their Egyptian bedspreads. Verse 18. Come, let's drink deeply of love till morning. Let's enjoy ourselves with love. And then, for verse 19, she reads his mind, and he's thinking what every single guy in this room is thinking right now, right? She says, don't worry. I need you to go to the next one for me. Did it lock up? There you go. She says, don't worry, my husband is not home. He has gone on a long journey. My husband's not home. He's gone on a long journey. And verse 20, he took his purse. Not only has he gone on a long journey, he took his purse. And we look at that and we go, that's confusing. Why has this guy got a purse? I mean, does he go to Sephora too? Is he? No, I'm just kidding. Right? Why does this guy have a purse? Okay, so here's what we're going to do. We're going to switch out of the New International Version, and we're going to switch into the New American Standard Version. And verse 20, it says this, he took his bag full of money. Oh, he took his bag of money with him, and he will not be home till the full moon. What's she saying? She's saying this. She says, there's no consequences if we don't get caught. My husband's gone. It's all good. No consequences. You can do the wrong things and it's still going to turn out right. I can take the wrong turn without actually going the wrong way, right? Can we? Verse 21, with persuasive words, she led him astray. She seduced him with her smooth talk. And look at verse 22. All at once, he followed her. He's like, I'm all in. Let's go. Sounds good. Right? He was thinking, I'm like a celebrity. I'm just going to go past the lines outside. I'm going to pass the bouncer to the best table in the house. And the narrator, look at what the narrator, because remember, it's coming from two different perspectives. And the narrator says this. He says in verse 22, all at once he followed her like an ox going to the slaughter. What? Slaughter? This is the greatest moment of my life. Slaughter? Are you kidding me? Ox? Who's like, listen, Grandpa Solomon, you're just old-fashioned. You forgot what it's like to have a good time. You forgot what it's like to enjoy yourself. Settle down, Gramps, right? All at once he followed her like a deer stepping into a noose until an arrow pierces his liver. Solomon, you are such a drama queen. Just relax. Just relax, right? Look at this. All at once he followed her like a bird darting into a snare, little knowing it will cost his life. Oh, come on. Good grief. Good grief, Solomon, right? This won't cost me anything. Maybe a little bit of my time, maybe a little bit of my money, right? This is low impact. Nothing's going to happen. It's just a good time, just a good night. Nothing's going to happen. And here's what the narrator now does. The narrator addresses his male audience directly, and here's what he says. Now pay attention, my sons. Listen to me. Pay attention to what I say. Do not let your heart turn to her ways or stray into her paths. Everybody say paths. Do not let your heart turn to her ways or stray into her paths. Wait, you're talking about paths? Paths? This isn't a path, this is just a diversion. Now is now, and later is later. Now is now, and later. This is just a diversion. This isn't my whole life. This doesn't make me that person. It just means I'm having a good time. It doesn't change who I am. It doesn't change the trajectory or the direction or the destination of my life. I'm a good person. I'm just blowing off a little steam. Now is now, and later is later. Look what he says in verse 26. He says, many are the victims she has brought down. Her slain are a mighty throng. I thought I was one in a million. Come to find out, I'm one of a million. Do you know why counselors are so smart? You know why counselors have such a good business? It's because we're so predictable. We're all predictable. Our direction has a destination connected to it. The counselor is able to look at your situation and look at what you tell them, and they're able to say, no, you're headed in a certain direction. And you go, I want you to fix it. And the counselor says, there's not a fix for your problem. There's not a fix for your problem. You must change your direction. And direction means that there's a process. You have to change the process in order to change the direction of your life. There's a process to changing things. There's a process to changing direction. There's a process to changing the course in order to change the outcome and the destination of your life. And what the narrator's saying is that her house is taking you somewhere. And you may think you have time to change your direction. But listen, her house appeared, to be a pastime. Turns out, her house was a pathway. What you thought was just a moment was actually the beginning of a course change of your life. Your intention was to be this person, but the direction has led you to be this person. It's taking you somewhere. It's taking you somewhere. You think it's a pastime, but in reality, it's a pathway. Let me say again, you are unique. You are unique. But your experience is not. And your path is not. And neither is your destination. I'm going to say that again. You are unique. Your experience is not. Your path is not. And ultimately, neither is your destination. If you continue on the path you're on, you could predict your future. You could predict the outcome of the activity. You say, no, I'm going to get off whenever I want. I love talking to people who've been smokers for 20 years. Like, well, I was 17 years old, and I was just smoking. I thought it was cool. Now I'm 56, and I need a new lung. And I'm still smoking. Why? Because what I thought was just a pastime became a pathway. Oh, I started out just socially drinking. Next thing I know, I can't go a day without drinking. I thought our relationship was just casual. I thought our relationship was just fun. And now here we are. We're having a child. Never thought that my life would be connected to this person for the rest of my life. No matter what I do, we're connected forever. What started out as a pastime became a pathway to a new direction and destination. See, more than likely, there's somebody in your life who has seen the trajectory you're on and has pointed out to you. They've talked to you about the areas that you don't want to talk about or you won't talk about. See, somebody has seen it and they said, listen, you need to stop. Listen, you need to get help. Listen, you need to make better decisions. Listen, you need to put that money away. Listen, that's a bad purchase. Listen, you don't want to take that job. Listen. I'm just trying to give you some advice here. I don't think that's the path you want to go down, because what seems like it's just going to be a moment of your time, what seems like it's just going to be a pastime, is actually a pathway to a destination you don't want to end up on. When I worked for Frito-Lay, there was a gentleman. What was interesting about Frito-Lay, guys who pack out, when you go to the store and you see guys who are packing out chips, it's just chips. You know, some of those guys have doctorate degrees. One guy that I packed out chips with had a doctorate from Yale. He said, I'm just going to start, I'll just pack out chips for a year or two. One gentleman in particular that I really enjoyed, we had a great time. He was the guy who trained me. And he said, I have been here for 24 years. 24 years. I have a master's degree. I never thought I'd be retiring one day from Frito-Lay. There's nothing wrong with Frito-Lay. It's a great job. Some guys who make a very good living packing out chips, right? But he's like, this is not the destination I saw my life going. What started out as a pastime became a pathway. Now here I am. I never knew how. Now it's just a small example. We can all talk about people who've been caught in heroin addiction. I have a good friend who's a heroin addict, and I asked him about it one day. I said, how someone is talented, he was a state champion wrestler. And I asked him one day, I said, how did you get hooked on? He had to be locked up in rehab. I asked him, how did you get here? He said, you know what? I tried it one time, and that's all it took. He said, all you ever want is that one high again. What started out as a pastime, became a pathway to a destination he never thought his life would take. See, that friend who's talked to you, that friend who said, stop, that friend or your family or your parent or your loved one or that person who's close enough to you and say, hey, don't do it. Don't. This is a bad investment. This is a bad choice. This is a bad decision. This is a bad path to go down. They don't want, and you don't want, and your Heavenly Father doesn't want you to be a victim of the disconnect between intention and direction. There can be a disconnect between where we want to be and the direction that we're actually taking. Remember, it's not your intention that determines destination. Direction determines destination. So let's add a word in your notes to our definition of the principle of the path. Direction, not intention, determines destination. You can pull that over for me, Mandy. Thank you. The principle of the path. Direction, not intention, determines destination. Now, you may be here and you say, Pastor Paul, you're taking all the fun out of my life. Well, I'm not taking all the fun, okay? Okay, so just, don't be so dramatic. Right? You're taking all the fun out of my life. I'm taking a little bit. I'll admit it. But actually, in place of it, I'm trying to give you something for your life. So listen to the very end of this today. I'm trying to give you something for your life. So here's what I want you to do. I'm going to help you out. I want you to do some homework for me. If you want to write it down, you can. Take it home. I didn't put it in your notes. But here's some homework for you. Here's what I want you to do. I want you to get an empty box. Now, if you're wondering where you can get an empty box, the mailman brings boxes to you all the time. They have those little smiles with the arrows on them, right? Some of you, you have boxes you haven't even opened yet with those little smiles on them. Sometimes they come and you're like, ooh, I didn't even know I had a box coming, right? And there's that box. So you take that box, take the stuff out of it, take that empty box, and here's what I want you to do. I want you to collect all the fun you've had, and I want you to put it in that box. That's step 2. Get an empty box, step 2. Put all your fun in that box. Then step 3, I want you to take all the money you've spent on that fun, and I want you to put it in that box. Then I want you to take that box, set it there, and I want you to stare at it. Just take a real good look at all the fun and all the money your fun has cost you, right? Then I want you to push back. I want you to think about your most generous moments and your most selfless days. I want you to think about the times you did the right thing and it cost you, right? You went and you gave that money to that organization. You disciplined yourself to stay within your means. You went on that trip to help those people. You sat with that person in their time of need. You held their hand. You loved them. You went out of your way to confront something that you saw coming in their life. I want you to think about that time that you did the right thing and it cost you something. The times you said no to you and you said yes to someone else. Let me ask you, what do you want more of? Memories of fun or memories that remind you of the most satisfying moments? In your notes, fun is always in the rearview mirror. Fun is always in the rearview mirror. We're always looking back and going, oh, I remember that time. It was so much fun, right? And here's the thing about our fun moments. We have a tendency to over-exaggerate them, right? You know what I'm talking about. You caught a fish that was this big, but you tell the story and it was this big, right? You went for a ride at Disney and you were actually on the roller coaster in the kids' park, but you tell everybody else and it sounds like you were so high on that roller coaster that you were looking out, could see all over Orlando, right? We have a tendency to over-exaggerate our fun, even the good fun. It's in our rear view mirror. But satisfaction, in your notes, satisfaction is a traveling companion. It sits in the passenger seat every single day. Satisfaction is a traveling companion. See, here's why. Because satisfaction is the result of arriving where you intended to be. Satisfaction is the result of arriving where you intend, not where you accidentally ended up, but where you intended to be. Satisfaction eludes those who live disconnected life. Those that say today is today and tomorrow doesn't matter. Those who say, I'll put it on credit today and I'll figure out a way to pay for it tomorrow. Those who say, I'll live my life this way today and eventually I'll clean up my act. I'll act this way today and I'll act that way tomorrow. I'll live this way today. And you know what? Someday I'm going to become disciplined. Someday I'm going to become morally upright. Someday I'll change and I'll... Satisfaction is the result of arriving where you intended to be. Could I suggest that maybe it's time for a little less fun, but a little bit more joy, peace, satisfaction? See, the path we choose makes all the difference. The principle of the path, direction, not intention, determines destination. So, I talked to you last week about Jesus' invitation to come follow me. Here's what Jesus says. Jesus says, come follow me, and I will give you rest. Sometimes we think about that and you think, okay, well, following Jesus, if I'm following, that means I'm going someplace, and that doesn't sound very restful. But Jesus says, listen, he says, you're going someplace, you're going to some destination. And if you follow me, my burden is easy, or my yoke is easy, and my burden is light. In other words, here's what he says. He says, when you follow me, your life's weight will be lighter. The things of life, the stuff that you carry, the things in your pack of life are lighter for those who follow me. Now notice what Jesus doesn't require. Jesus doesn't require an initiation fee. Jesus doesn't require a bunch of do's and don'ts. Just follow. In other words, change direction. Because changing direction means that everything else will change. When we change direction, everything else changes. So let me ask you as I begin to wrap this up this morning, are you living in the right direction? Look at the direction your life is headed. All the alleys, morally, relationally, financially, marriagely. Is your direction correct? In other words, let me put it another way. Does your direction line up with your intentions? I want to be here. My intention is that I'll be, I'll do, I'll have. Do your intentions line up with your directions? Now, let me say this as I wrap up, because it's quiet. It's very, very quiet. This isn't an attempt to make anybody feel guilty. It's not my goal here. This isn't my attempt to make you feel conviction. Oh, I feel so convicted. People walk out sometimes and go, Pastor, you got me. I feel so convicted. That's not my intention. That's not my intention. Because those things never last. Feel guilty for a day or two and you just go back to the same direction. Feel conviction for a day or two and you just go back to the same habits in the same direction. It's not my intention today. My intention is that you change the direction that you're living in. And that's the invitation of Jesus, right? Would you begin to make a U-turn in your life? Would you begin to make a U-turn in certain areas that you're headed in the wrong direction and start living in the right direction? Because direction, not intention, determines destination. Let's pray. Heavenly Father, we thank you that we can hear your word and that your word is always pointing us in the right directions. We thank you that your word is always giving us life and hope and that it's pointing us to the direction that has least resistance and ultimately less stuff to be burdened with. And so I pray for everyone here who needs to make some kind of direction change. Maybe it's a complete U-turn. Maybe it's an absolute change in many areas. God, I pray that we would sit down and really contemplate and think about the direction that we're headed in, because it determines the destination we're headed towards. I pray that you would keep us and bring us back into your house next week. We ask all these things in the name of Jesus. Amen.